Welcome back to this edition of the Global Dream Circles podcast. I'm Lisa Gale, and I had the pleasure and honor of speaking with Dr. Karen Ward of Chroí, Irish Celtic Shamanism. Chroí meaning the pathway of the heart, and Karen truly is a woman of the heart. From the beautiful work she's doing there at Chroí with her husband John Cantwell, to the women's circles she facilitates with Moon Mana, to the psychotherapy work she's doing, integrating these spiritual practices into the world of psychotherapy, the books that she's written, and I could go on and on. Karen truly is a powerhouse of passion and love and fire. I think you'll see that shine forth today in our chat. Of course, we'll be talking about the dream time, dreams, Imrama, wonder voyages, shamanic journeying, the power of intention, and integration, allowing these experiences to fully integrate into the body, the hearts, the soul, the mind, and living into their meaning rather than jumping to interpret them analytically. And we'll even hear some personal dream stories from Karen. So you are invited to step through the veil of time and space and see what's in the dream time for you. You will see a sacred site in the background, Darina Taggart, which is there on the Bear Peninsula. Enter sacredly. It brings in a gorgeous ancient energy. You are invited to bring in your gorgeous ancient energy into the dream time. Benakti Agaskara. Blessings and love to you all. So, welcome, Karen.
Thank you. I am very delighted to be here.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned to you in our communications, I started a really an ongoing conversation with multiple others about this topic and this concept of dreaming. And here we are, in the beautiful, beautiful spiritual practice that you and John are sharing with so many, myself included, humbled and honored to be part of it, and to be availing of those teachings. Here we are in the season of the South, where there's yet another heavy emphasis and focus on the dreaming, the dream time, the dream world. And I know every culture, ancient culture, has its own story and its own way of framing what a dream is and the dreaming. And was fortunate enough to speak with Monaghan Morgan a while back, and he shared some of the words and the phrases that have survived through Irish history. And so, there you are, a gorgeous being of the land there yourself, yet you've traveled so many places. And so I thought it would be really wonderful to share with people what your experiences are of dreaming, whether they be night dreams, visions, shamanic journeys that we take, the Imram, just all this wisdom and embodiment of knowledge that you have there. So very welcome to just share whatever comes to heart.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. What strikes me is that phrase that we so often use, not just in Ireland, but in indigenous cultures the world over, where we dream our world into being. And very much part of the Irish Celtic shamanic focus is our intention. And as you mentioned, when we go on the Imrama wonder voyages, the starting point is always to have a very clear intention of where you want to go. And I'm smiling because in our modern world, when we do anything, whether we are looking for a home to rent or to buy, whether we're looking for a job, whether we're looking for a relationship, we need to know what we are aiming for, where we are going, what is the focus. Some people would say, what is the goal? And then we head towards that. And similarly in esoteric, in spiritual ways of being, if we muddle along in life, that is fate. But if we want to live a path of destiny, then we need to have some sense of where we're going. Now, we might know the specifics of it, but that there's an inner calling very much from the heart And in the Celtic tradition, the heart and the soul are inextricably linked, so that we have a sense of where we're heading to, why we are incarnate. And what's wonderful is the more we lean into or delve deep into these practices, we recognize that there has always been a path forward that our ancestors were very aware of, and the ancient ways maybe evolved forward so that we can use them as tools in one way, but also as signs that we're on the right track, on the right path, which is really exciting. And they're so simple that often they are missed. And that might be, as you mentioned, our night dreams, where we have a very vivid, almost prophetic dream, and or we dream about something unpleasant. In other words, we're living it in our dream what is not appropriate to live in our life. So there's a form of releasing shadow, as it would be called, um, that which we do not want to bring into our conscious living, we can release through our dreams. And some people might say, oh gosh, they're almost nightmares. But then there's other type of dreams which are almost visionary. I remember a long, long time ago, many moons ago, having an incredibly vivid dream. I lived in London at the time. It was the late 80s, a difficult time in Ireland. There was a succession of, how would you call them, recessions. It was a very grey time to live there, and many young people like myself left in search of ways to live that we could use our skills, our experience, but really to make a decent living. And I ended up in London and had this very, very strong dream where I was in my grandmother's kitchen. Now, my grandmother lived in Dublin City like myself, but it's a very small city where you can see the mountains from the sea and the sea from the mountains. It's quite a green city. But in this dream, I'm in her kitchen, which was a place I would have been very familiar with from childhood. And on the kitchen table was a form of a lion with a big mane. And I could see through the kitchen table a parched earth with almost like an earthquake. And I could see down into this gap. And it seemed like the line was in the gap or the kitchen was in the gap. It was really interesting, but I can even recall it today. And then the dream stopped. And it was a very curious dream because my grandmother had died at that stage. The house was still in the family, but I thought, what is that all about? And of course, I was living in London, working the corporate world with my big hair and my high shoulder pads and my high heels. And I remember quite soon after that, I was in a boardroom in Manchester. One of my clients was Kellogg's, the breakfast people. And we were all sitting around a very fancy boardroom deciding what widget was going to go in Kellogg's Frosties, which was a breakfast cereal. And I remember in a flash of uh, inspiration, of knowing that while there are many children who might delight in opening their box and seeing what was in it, nobody was going to die. This was not a life-threatening situation. And I realized I'm done here. I had no idea what I was going to do, but it wasn't this. And quite soon afterwards, I left that company and followed the holistic world and ended up where I am. But I think back to the dream that a lion, a male lion, you might say Leo, a leader, somebody who is out in the world, very obviously. Um, if you see a male lion, you think of maybe he's leading the pack, um, a hunter, somebody who's out there chasing their dreams, my case. And the crack in the parched earth was I wasn't nourishing my soul, and I was either slipping through the cracks or I needed to go go down delve into from my head to my soul. And my grandmother, I know now, was a seer. At the time, I didn't. In fact, both my grandmothers were. Granny Margie read tea leaves, and Granny Kathleen was a banshee. She could tell when somebody was going to die. And it just opened a whole new world to me. So that dream was prophetic, but it was also a stop me in my tracks and realize there's something I need to pay attention to here. And thankfully I did, because the life that I was living in London was a very cushy, fancy life. There was a lot of recognition. I was making a lot of money, but it wasn't nurturing my soul.
Yeah. Wow. Um, Out of curiosity, from the time you had that night dream to the time it took you to step away, and then all of this reflection of wisdom and understanding of imagery that came forth in that dream in linear time, what was that like? How long did it take from that momentary dream in your night to understanding and living into it?
It was quite soon, and around that time my father died. So that was another huge awakening. My grandmother died in 87 and my father died in 89. And I now recognize that to have your father die of a massive heart attack at 53 is shocking. He certainly didn't expect it. Nobody did. But I recognize at some level there was very much a soul contract, because his exit from this world set was a catalyst for certainly for me and my spiritual emergence. And I can see within my family also an emergence of maybe different sorts. They wouldn't use those terms. So I think fairly soon around that time I would have begun a yoga practice. I came back to Ireland in 1991, and I began to study to become a yoga teacher fairly soon after that. And then aromatherapy, then psychotherapy, um, reflexology, a number of holistic nutrition, and the shamanism followed after that. So it was fairly soon afterwards, I would have to say. But even though I didn't understand the exact implications, I did recognize that it was a major sign, both the dream and then my father's passing. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big one. Yeah.
Mm.
You touched on something really important, which is that, when you sometimes when you have a night dream like that, it makes no sense. There's just the imagery is just so incredible, but it kind of stays with you and works with you and works its way through into this 3D reality. And as you said, it could be very instant. And for some people, it might not be. It could take, a decade or more to really live into it. And then to be able to have the, reflection and the insights that come from, that's what that meant in that dream. Yeah.
I know within our Chroí, our school of Irish Celtic shamanism, John in particular, my husband, when anybody asks him a question, what did that dream mean, John? He'll nod sagely and go, "Hmm. And what did it mean to you?" He's a great tendency to put it back on the person asking the question. However, I do remember a long time ago I had a client, and she's given me permission to share elements of this particular dream. But she came to me in quite a shocking state that she'd had this dream about her beloved sister. And in the dream, we'll call her Martina. So in the dream, Martina is in her bedroom, and her sister, who we call Mary, is lying on the bed beside her, asleep. And Martina looks around the room and suddenly realizes that there's something odd. And their clothes, their bodies, the bedspread, every item in the room, she realizes starts to shift. There's a kind of a browny tone to it. And next minute she realizes everything is covered in cockroaches. And suddenly they wings open and they start to fly. And she's glued to the bed, horrified. And she looks down, and her sister was barefoot. And she can see on one of her sister's foot this oozing, scabby, horrible wound. And she, and maybe she saw the wound first and then they began to fly. But anyway, she was very perturbed about this dream. But when we, to use the jargon, unpacked it, I asked her, what do cockroaches mean to you? And she had just come back from Egypt. And she said, well, funny enough, we don't really have cockroaches as such in Ireland. But she said, I was really taken in Egypt. They would be known as a scarab, and they are a sign of healing. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I said, what would you understand by your sister's, the foot? And she said, I don't know, but she said, I do remember thinking the underside of your foot is unseen. And that was it. And 3 months later, she came back to me and she said, Karen, I really wanted to let you know what the outcome was. But she said, my sister Mary, a few days later, confessed to the family that she was addicted to cocaine and that none of us saw it coming. We just thought she was very outgoing and it was hidden, hence the festering wound in the foot. And she said Martina recognized that she wanted to be able to help her sister, and she had always wanted to study to be a counselor, but kind of put it off. But in the 3 months, she had seen the huge strides her sister had made by going to see not just any counselor, but a holistic counselor. And that started Martina on her study route to become a counselor, a holistic counselor. So what started out as really a horrible nightmare, I mean, ugh, cockroaches on your bed, ugh, transpired to be, again, a vision, you might say, prophetic, but it, maybe even in the dream, it gave the sister permission to tell this awful secret that she had and to seek help and healing with it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful story. And what an encouragement to, oftentimes if we have a really scary or very disturbing dream, the last thing we want to do is go back into it and try to understand it. Many would just say, oh God, I don't know what that was. I'm going to forget about it. But it illustrates how important it is that, it was getting her attention. And instead of looking away, she looked deeper and said, what is this? What is here? And then look, it transformed her life. And it sounds like possibly her sister's as well.
Very much so, Lisa. And I mean, the shamans of this land, the Celtic Isles, the Druids, they had 3 areas of training: the bardic training, the storytellers, the historians, if you will, the Ovates, the healers, and then the Druids, the wise elders, if you will. And they would have studied for 7 years for each of those 3 um, areas of their overall training. So 21 years sitting under a hedge in a hedge school. Whereas we are very blessed in that in the modern world we can come to the understanding of these in a quicker way. And from the shamanic perspective, the dream time would often be referred to as we enter the other world. Now, every indigenous culture has their version of it. I mean, the dream time you might think is synonymous very much with those from the Australias, the indigenous people, the people who live in those in that beautiful continent, and we would have similarities in the ancient stories, which have a dreamlike quality to them. And of course, a bit like poetry, they are not to be literally translated. When you are describing quite, as you might say, a highfalutin esoteric principle. It's very hard to bring it into literal terms. So the language, the evocative, poetic language that we use, um, gives that sense of them. And it's like that for me with dreams. They are not literal, but they're an imagining, a way of us grabbing our attention and helping us to work with them, to delve deeper down into their meanings. What we've come across often is somebody who might come to us with their dream, inviting us to interpret it for them. And it's really important that you take responsibility for your own dream, because if I dream about dolphins and I go to a dream book, they will have, oh, dreaming about dolphins means this, which is great, but they haven't been in my dream and they don't know my dolphins. So therefore, while it's important, yes, discuss your dreams, maybe see what anybody else might think, but ultimately the responsibility is yours. And just like the example I gave, it was Martina ultimately who came up with the interpretation. All I did and was honored to do, like any holistic counselor or shamanic therapist, is I asked the right questions, and that basically elicited the answer from her.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've been studying my dreams for a very long time. And when I started, you couldn't find dream books. I couldn't. So I was kind of stuck with the imagery. And then myself, I did I would search around online at some stage when I noticed those things were available, but it just didn't bring the depth of meaning and, as you said, soul into the interpretation, or not even interpretation, but the living of, because they're so archetypal. Even the imagery that you've brought forth, sharing your own personal dream experiences, or Martina's. So yeah, that's very, very important. I would say so too. And just let it live through you. Let it live and breathe through you. And as you said, find someone who is willing to sit with you and help you come to a deeper understanding in your own time, without trying to tell you and force a meaning or interpretation on you. That's
Mm.
really important for folks to hear.
We had a marvelous opportunity. John and I were invited to be keynote speakers over in the UK, our sister Celtic island, and it was a gathering of, you could call them shamanic counselors, psychotherapists. And they had a gathering once a year on the land. Everybody was in tents or yurts. And we started every morning with a dream incubation. Or you could say we ended every night with the intention of us remembering our dreams. And then in the morning, before breakfast, we'd all gather and we would share our dreams. And what was quite interesting was, a little bit like women who sit together or work together or in school together, where everybody begins to have their moon time around the same time. So they shed their menstrual blood, come into synchronization. Similarly, with the dreams, there became a common thread with the dreams. And there was no interpretation. So, for example, Lisa, you would share your dream last night. And I would go, that's interesting, you were dreaming about tigers. Actually, there were stripes in my dream, but there was a zebra crossing, blah, 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 blah. And then the next person, Bill, might turn around and say, funny you were thinking about zebra crossings, because in my dream there were roads. And what would emerge would be a theme, if you will. And somebody would jot up on a blackboard the theme. So um, tigers, zebra crossing, roads. And then at the end of the hour, we'd have up all of these connections, which was really interesting. And John and I often do that. We would say to people, look, if you like, have a very strong intention to remember your dream in the morning, have your pen and paper beside you, jot them down. It's a common practice all over the world. But I really liked the dream incubation idea, where the whole idea was to share your dreams. And of course, inevitably, because that was the practice, there were people who never remember the dream suddenly going, "Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it! I really remembered my dream." So again, that speaks very much of the intention. And of course, it was the great Carl Jung, in particular, many moons ago, who brought the the dream, the unconsciousness of our dreams, conscious. So whatever's going on in our conscious with our dreams becomes conscious, and therefore it is food and drink, shall we say, for our conscious living. In that it can be a message from spirit, from God, goddess, the universe, whatever you want to call that transpersonal element. But again, they are what you would call sacred tools. And a little bit like our breath, this is something that is innate, it's free. We don't need to go up and buy a fancy drum or do a fancy course. It's all here. And all we need to do is tap into that for the riches that will emerge.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. The medicine is here. It's right there. That
Very
you're
much so.
speaking my language, because dream incubation is one of my favorite practices, and doing it with a group of people, very much like yourself. I've seen a similar thing. And what really got me so interested in this was an Imrama that we did back in the South 2 years ago in Medicine Spiral, where that imagery just continues to live forth, to this day, I'd say. But I discovered a tribe down in South America, the Achuar, who have a dream practice. They get up every morning and share their dreams with each other, and it informs their day. And because this is such a multi-generational at this stage practice, they're constantly dreaming for each other. And the family shares the dream with each other. And if they need to consult the shaman of the village, then they will. But there's more of a practice of just living together in the sleep dream time, and then I guess what the Aboriginals would have called, and Celtic ancestors would have called this dream time, the other world in this world. Really beautiful, magical practices, which brings to question, and maybe we'll try to land on this one. What's really fun is waking up these capacities within us and recognizing that maybe we're all dreaming here together. And as you opened with this concept of intentionality from our heart and from our souls, what might come forth if we had the intention to dream together for our community, for our world, for our cosmos. And if that became, I think that's a dream that comes forth from my heart, is that we would have a culture of intentional dreaming with one another again.
And to a certain extent, Lisa, there are elements of your beautiful and evocative sharing there as in practice, because you see, I mean, we see it in our world in a very poignant, tragic way at the moment. The Ukrainian people have a very strong dream of their own land and their own culture being preserved. And against all the odds, it's a David and Goliath situation. Whatever your political beliefs may be, but you have to I think everybody can agree that here is this tiny David taking on Goliath, and nobody can really believe, including themselves, that they've been able to keep it going for so long. But if you've met any Ukrainian people, it is quite amazing what has come from in forth this palpable sense of identity, of belonging, of who we are, of preserving this for future generations. So that's just one example. And again, you might look at people holding, say, a longer vision. For example, in the Americas, Turtle Island, the Native American people, um, against all the odds, they have preserved their medicine ways. And look how many people from all over the world who came to the Americas are now having a huge appreciation of what happened back in the day, the colonization, the genocide, but how many people in the holistic world will start with, I live in such and such a place, and they'll mention the tribe that lived there, and asking those people to share their ways with them. Similarly, here in Ireland, um, I have to say, I never thought in my lifetime I would see peace on this island. And we've had it for years now. And also, we never thought that the government in the Republic of Ireland, the government in the north of Ireland, and the British government would openly talk about a united Ireland. I mean, that was inconceivable. But yet, our ancestors held that dream for so, so long. And it's taken an eon, but it's within grasping time. And we use this expression, we stand on the shoulders of our foremothers and forefathers. And in particular, with Moon Mná, which is, Mná is the Irish Gaelic for women. So we're Moon women, and we would be the women's section, if you will, of Chroí, the Pathway of the Heart, our school of Irish Celtic shamanism. And we recognize that as Irish women, and in fact, we're women from all around the world, but that having come from a very patriarchal world, which thankfully is turning, especially in the Western world, we are able to live the lives we live because of the dreams, particularly of our grandmothers, our great grandmothers. These are women who they didn't have a vote. Whatever their husband said, they had to do. They had no independence, financial or otherwise. And here am I beside my husband, with my I think you'd say my shingle outside the door, my sign. I am a holistic therapist, I'm a psychotherapist, I'm an energy therapist, and within most places I go with discernment, I can say I am an Irish Celtic shaman. I follow those practices, shall I say. Whereas that was unthinkable even up to 30 years ago. So that is extraordinary. I mean, that's in my lifetime, and I'm just barely 60. So therefore, these dreams that we have, as you beautifully mentioned, of dreaming our world into being, um, for peace, for equality, we can bring them to fruition. But we also have to remember that human life here on Earth has an element, and I use this word lightly, but an element of a game or an experiment. The very nature of being incarnate human means we have choices. So we have come from, depending on what your belief system, but we've come from a place of bliss, the other world, heaven, Valhalla, whatever you want to call it. We're incarnate in a certain set of circumstances, our parents, our place in the world, and can we get back to that blissful state? In I mean, personally, I wouldn't dream of killing somebody or stealing from somebody. However, I have to be honest. If my children were starving, I would rob food to feed them. And if somebody sexually abused my niece or nephew, I would be ready to kill. So therefore, there but for the grace of God go I is that expression. And it sometimes strikes me that the being incarnate in the world, we're given a set of circumstances. How would you react if? Can we use the toolkit that we have in walking a path of nature-based spirituality? I mean, I look at the violence in the world, and with the Barons. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. But I have to live my life and not be violent to myself in my head, to dream in a peace in here so that I can emanate out that peace and therefore dream in a peaceful world from the inside out, if that makes sense. So there's many ways to bring that dreaming into fruition, and it can be from the outside in, but very importantly from the inside out.
Yeah, very importantly. That's an important double exclamation point on everything that has come forth here is that personal responsibility that we have to create world peace in here. And to the extent that we can, eliminate all inner sources of violence, so that we can be that peaceful, dreaming place for whatever it is that wishes to come forth through the other world to perhaps manifest here in this one.
Mm.
Yeah.
And inevitably, um, what's this gorgeous Irish saying? Asha, there's always something. And roughly translated as, at the moment, I might be, in my case, working through the grief of the last year. John's mum died, my mother died, my sister died very unexpectedly. Two dear friends, the same age as me, died. So there was a lot of grief that I'm working through. And I am, again, I use that word blessed to have the awareness through nature-based spirituality to be able to receive solace, that they're at peace, but also to work through that for me. But I'm completely aware that once I overcome the grief, do you know what? Something else will come my way, and then I'll have to work through that. So that expression, sure, there's always something. Um, there are times when we have a blissful existence, but it's only temporary because we don't learn anything when everything is going very smoothly. It's great, and it's important to celebrate those times in joy and in community, but inevitably something else will come up to test us and to see, well, okay, let's see how peaceful you are now. Let's see how your dreaming in is now.
Yeah. And that calls forth this concept of beauty, and which is such an important part of the Shlian Cree practices. Just that honoring of walking in beauty and how we can do that regardless of grief, regardless of anger, regardless of any outer or even inner circumstances. We always have the opportunity to bring some sense of beauty to that. Yeah.
Mm. And again, it that principle comes forth in what would be called core shamanism in many indigenous practices. And we're blessed here with, I mean, the countryside, the land. We have so many. I'm looking at the beautiful sacred site, the stone circle behind you, that these are meridian points in our land. For anybody who practices Tai Chi, Qigong, acupuncture would be familiar with that concept, that there is, yeah, the energy is a currency of spirituality, and it permeates our bodies. And there are certain, our chakras, we'd be mostly familiar with them. In Ireland, we have the three cauldrons, and the fourth and the sixth chakra, equinoxes, sunrises, moonrises, Venus rising, and they're places of power. And when we are there, our ancestors would have come for usually for a 3-day celebration for the Celtic festivals. But now we are privileged to be able to stay quite near these places. And your dreams are off the charts when you go to these places because they are such places of quite potency, very powerful. And again, it's often said, and certainly my John myself and John would find it, you can't stay in these places for very long because they are so powerful. And if you're anyway energetic sensitive, they you need to go off, go away, go back home, and process, to use that jargon, to mull over what has happened. And as you mentioned yourself there, Lisa, there are dreams that years later can finally make sense. That's what that was all about. So that we have great riches, jewels within our dreams if we mine them in a very conscious way,
Yeah,
and
it's really
indeed
beautiful.
subconscious way.
Right. The idea of tending, dream tending. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. Well, Karen, this has been splendid dreaming with you. You've just shared so much wisdom with us all here today. I just want to say thank you so much, Mela Buikas, and so much gratitude. Gra.
Mila Buikas, Lisa, thank you so much for all that you do. And it's for everyone who's listening, it is always such an honor and pleasure to share these beautiful esoteric practices and to evolve them forward, as no doubt in time to come others will do of all that we speak out of now, but that it comes from a place of the heart. It comes from deep within, knowing that we are part of all that is.
Sha.
Sha. Shin A.